The Galactic Unity Academy floated in the calm void between three peaceful star systems, and for 200 years it had welcomed students from across the known universe without a single major incident. Administrator Velith had seen species of every shape and size pass through her halls, from the towering silicon-based Gruth to the delicate feathered Valanthe, and she prided herself on maintaining perfect harmony among them all. But today was different, and she could feel it in her crystalline bones as she watched the human transport ship dock at bay. 7 humans were the first students ever accepted from a Class 12 death world, a planet so dangerous that most species refused to believe intelligent life could evolve there at all. The reports she had read described a world of extreme temperature swings, constant seismic activity, a star that bombarded the surface with radiation, and an atmosphere filled with a corrosive gas the humans casually called oxygen. Yet somehow these soft, fragile-looking creatures had not only survived but thrived, and now 3 of them were about to become the first of their kind to attend the most prestigious academy in the galaxy. Velith adjusted her translation collar and forced her face into what she hoped was a welcoming expression as the airlock hissed open. The first human to step through was a young male named Kai Chen, and Velith noted that he moved with a surprising grace for a being from a high-gravity world. Behind him came Amara Okonkwo, her dark skin gleaming under the station lights, and finally Marcus Webb, who had an odd smile on his face that Velith could not quite interpret. They seemed friendly enough, she thought, and perhaps all the warnings about Deathworlders had been exaggerated. Then she noticed the containers they were carrying. "Greetings and welcome to the Galactic Unity Academy," Velith said, her voice warm despite her growing unease. "I am Administrator Velith, and I will be your guide during orientation." "Thank you so much for having us," Amara replied with a gentle dip of her head. "We are very excited to be here, and to learn alongside so many different species." Yes, wonderful," Velith said, her eyes still fixed on the strange containers. "I must ask, what are those items you have brought with you?" Kai stepped forward with a wide smile that showed his teeth, a gesture Velith found deeply unsettling, even though she knew humans meant it as friendliness. "These are our emotional support companions," he explained. "We applied for special permission months ago, and we were told it was approved." Velith felt her stomach drop, or at least the organ that served a similar function in her species. "Companions," she repeated weakly. "Yeah, our pets," Marcus added cheerfully. "Would you like to meet them?" Before Velith could respond, Kai had already knelt down and opened his carrier, and something emerged that made the administrator take 3 rapid steps backward. It was a creature covered in thick fur, with a long snout filled with sharp teeth, pointed ears that swiveled to catch every sound, and eyes that gleamed with obvious intelligence. The beast was massive by galactic standards, easily weighing as much as a small Valanthe, and it moved with the fluid grace of a natural-born predator. "This is Bear," Kai said fondly, running his hand through the creature's fur. "He is a German shepherd, and he has been my best friend since I was 12 years old." The animal called Bear looked at Velith and let out a sound from deep in its chest, a low rumble that vibrated through the deck plating and triggered every prey instinct she had spent centuries learning to suppress. "He likes you," Kai said happily. "That means he wants to be friends." Velith could not respond because her voice had stopped working entirely. Amara had opened her own carrier, and from within emerged a smaller but no less terrifying creature. This one had sleek fur, enormous eyes that caught the light with an eerie glow, and retractable claws that clicked against the metal floor as it walked. It sat down, wrapped its tail around its feet, and stared at Velith without blinking. "This is Empress," Amara said softly. "She is a Maine Coon cat, and she is very gentle once she gets to know you." The creature called Empress continued to stare, and Velith felt as though she were being evaluated by an assassin, deciding whether she was worth the effort to kill. "And this," Marcus announced proudly, holding up a clear container, "is Noodle." Inside the container was a creature that made Velith emit a sound she had not made since childhood, a high-pitched whistle of pure terror. It was long and cylindrical with no legs at all, covered in smooth scales that formed intricate patterns, and it moved by flowing like liquid across the bottom of its enclosure. "What in the name of the first light is that?" Velith gasped. "A ball python," Marcus said, as if this explained anything. "She is very shy and mostly just likes to sleep and eat frozen mice." "It eats other creatures?" Velith whispered in horror. "Well, yes," Marcus shrugged. "She is a snake, that is what they do." At that moment, Chief Security Officer Threll came running down the corridor, his scales flushed bright red with alarm. "Administrator, the quarantine scanners are going insane," he shouted. "They are detecting multiple apex predators in this section, possible biohazard contamination, and at least one creature classified as a constriction-based ambush hunter." He skidded to a halt when he saw the humans and their companions. "Oh no," he said quietly. Bear chose that moment to yawn, displaying a mouth full of teeth capable of crushing bone, and Threll made a sound very similar to the one Velith had made moments before. "Perhaps," Velith said slowly, her voice shaking only slightly, "we should move this orientation to a secure location." "Is something wrong?" Kai asked, genuine confusion on his face as Bear pressed against his leg and gazed up at him adoringly. "Bear is fully trained and very friendly. I promise." The predator's tail began to wag back and forth, a movement that the Academy's threat assessment database identified as a pre-attack intimidation display. Velith watched as the young human reached down and scratched the beast behind its ears, and the creature's tongue lolled out in obvious pleasure. These Deathworlders had brought monsters onto her station, and they were treating them like beloved family members as she led the humans toward the quarantine wing, watching the massive canine trot happily at Kai's heels while the feline rode on Amara's shoulder and the serpent coiled contentedly around Marcus's arm. Velith realized that everything she thought she knew about the universe had just been proven terribly, terribly wrong. The humans had arrived, and they had brought their pets. The Galactic Unity Academy would never be the same. The first week of classes brought chaos, unlike anything the Galactic Unity Academy had experienced in its 200-year history. It started on the second day when Kai walked into advanced interstellar mathematics with Bear padding softly at his heels. The Valanthi students, a delicate species covered in iridescent feathers, had been chatting quietly among themselves when the door opened. 20 feathered heads turned to look at the newcomer, and 20 pairs of eyes locked onto the large predator walking beside him. For exactly 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then one of the Valanthi let out a shriek that shattered 2 light fixtures, and the entire flock exploded into panicked flight. Feathers filled the air like a colorful snowstorm as students crashed into walls, knocked over desks, and fought to reach the emergency exits. Bear, startled by the commotion, let out a single bark. The sound was not particularly loud by human standards, but it had evolved over thousands of years to carry across vast distances on a high-gravity world with a thick atmosphere. To the sensitive hearing of the Valanthi, it was like a bomb going off inside their skulls. 3 students fainted on the spot, and Professor Milaxis had to be treated for shock in the medical bay. Kai spent the rest of the day apologizing to everyone he met, while Bear sat beside him looking confused about what he had done wrong. The next incident involved Empress and occurred in the dormitory common room. The cat had simply been sitting on a windowsill, watching the stars drift by outside the station, her tail flicking lazily back and forth. A group of Gruth students had entered the room laughing about something, their massive bodies filling the doorway. The Gruth were a peaceful species despite their intimidating size, and they had been looking forward to meeting the famous humans from the Death World. Look at the tiny predator, one of them rumbled with amusement, pointing at Empress. It is so small and fluffy. How could anyone be afraid of such a thing? Empress turned her head and fixed the speaker with her unblinking golden stare. The Gruth stopped laughing. There was something in those eyes, something ancient and patient and utterly without mercy. It was the gaze of a creature whose ancestors had spent millions of years perfecting the art of the hunt, a predator that killed not out of hunger or necessity, but simply because it enjoyed the act. The Gruth student who had spoken felt his legs begin to shake. "Why does it not blink?" he whispered to his companions. "I do not know," another replied in a terrified voice, "but I think we should leave now." They backed out of the room slowly, never turning away from the cat. And Empress watched them go with what Amara could have sworn was a satisfied expression. The Gruth filed 17 complaints with the administration about hostile wildlife before dinner. But the true diplomatic crisis began 3 days later when Counselor Myrix attempted to make friends with Noodle Myrix was a Pulari, a species that resembled large masses of sentient gelatin, and they communicated through a combination of shape-changing and low-level telepathy. The Pulari were known throughout the galaxy for their friendliness and their desire to form bonds with every species they encountered. Myrix had heard about the human companions and decided that reaching out to one of them would be an excellent way to build bridges between cultures. She found Marcus in the biology lab, studying for an exam, with Noodle's terrarium sitting on the desk beside him. "Greetings, young human," Myrix burbled happily, her gelatinous form wobbling with enthusiasm. "I have come to meet your fascinating companion creature." "Oh, that is very kind of you," Marcus said with a smile. "Noodle is a bit shy, but I am sure she would appreciate the attention." "Wonderful, wonderful," Myrix said, and without waiting for further instruction, she extended a friendly pseudopod toward the terrarium's open top. What happened next would be discussed in diplomatic circles for years to come. Noodle, who had been sleeping peacefully in her favorite hiding spot, suddenly found a strange, wobbling appendage invading her space. Her instincts took over instantly, the python coiled defensively, her body forming a tight spiral as she raised her head and let out a warning hiss. To Myrix, who had never encountered a creature like this before, it looked exactly like an attack preparation. She could see the muscles tensing, the scales gleaming, the cold reptilian eyes fixed on her with predatory focus. The Pulari did what any sensible being would do when faced with an ambush predator about to strike. She screamed, but Pulari do not scream with their voices, because they do not have voices. Instead, Myrix broadcast a telepathic alert at maximum power, sending waves of pure terror directly into the minds of every sentient being within 6 kilometers. "Danger!" The message screamed directly into hundreds of brains. "Constriction! Assassin attacking!" The humans have brought a killer to murder. The faculty chaos erupted across the entire station. Emergency alarms blared in every corridor as security teams mobilized for what they believed was a targeted assassination attempt. Students barricaded themselves in their rooms while teachers called for immediate evacuation. In the medical bay, Dr. Sketh was in the middle of a delicate surgery when the telepathic blast hit him, and he nearly dropped his laser scalpel into his patient. Marcus stood in the middle of the biology lab, completely bewildered, as heavily armed security officers burst through the door with weapons drawn. "What is happening?" he asked, looking around in confusion. "Noodle just got a little scared, that is all." "Step away from the assassin," the lead officer commanded, his voice shaking as he aimed his weapon at the terrarium. "She is not an assassin," Marcus protested. "She is a ball python. She eats frozen mice and sleeps 18 hours a day." "It eats other creatures?" the officer repeated in horror, echoing Administrator Velith's words from a few days before. "That somehow makes this worse," his partner added. It took 4 hours to convince everyone that Noodle was not, in fact, a trained killer sent to eliminate key Academy personnel. Counselor Myrix had to be sedated after she refused to stop broadcasting warnings about the Serpent Menace. The Pulari Diplomatic Corps demanded an explanation for the psychological trauma inflicted on their representative, and the Galactic Council, having received panicked reports from a dozen different species, announced that they would be convening an emergency tribunal to determine whether the humans and their creatures should be expelled from the Academy immediately. That night, Kai, Amara, and Marcus sat together in their shared quarters, their pets gathered around them. Bear had his head in Kai's lap, sensing his owner's distress. Empress had curled up on Amara's chest, purring softly in an attempt to comfort her. And Noodle had wrapped herself around Marcus's shoulders like a living scarf, completely unaware that she had nearly started an interstellar incident. "What are we going to do?" Amara asked quietly. "We tell the truth," Kai replied, stroking Bear's soft fur. "We explain what these animals mean to us and hope they understand." Outside their window, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small drama unfolding aboard the station. Tomorrow, the humans would face judgment, and the fate of their beloved companions would hang in the balance. The Grand Tribunal Chamber was the largest room on the station, designed to hold representatives from every species in the Galactic Council. Today it was packed with observers, diplomats, journalists, and curious students who wanted to see what would happen to the infamous Deathworlders and their monsters. Kai, Amara, and Marcus stood in the center of the chamber, their pets held in force field containment units behind them. Bear paced nervously in his enclosure, whining softly at the separation from his human empress sat perfectly still, her tail wrapped around her paws. Watching the proceedings with her usual unblinking intensity, Noodle had coiled into a tight ball and appeared to be sleeping, completely unconcerned with the fate being decided around her. High Adjudicator Prelax presided over the tribunal from a raised platform, his crystalline body catching the light and scattering rainbows across the chamber walls. He was one of the oldest beings in the known galaxy, and his voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of wisdom. "This tribunal has been convened to address the matter of the Terran students and their companion creatures," he announced, his voice resonating through the room. "The charges are as follows." He consulted a glowing data pad before continuing. "Importation of unregistered apex predators into a peaceful educational facility," he read. "Psychological terrorism of fellow students through predatory intimidation, harboring a Class 7 ambush predator for purposes listed only as cuddles, and causing widespread panic through negligent handling of dangerous wildlife." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "How do the accused respond to these charges?" Prelax asked. Amara stepped forward, her head held high despite the fear she felt inside. "With respect, High Adjudicator, these charges are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what these animals are," she said, her voice clear and strong. "They are not weapons or threats or monsters. They are domesticated companions that have evolved alongside humanity for thousands of years." Representative Sketh of the hegemony rose from his seat, his insectoid features twisted in disgust. "You expect us to believe that your species deliberately chose to live with apex predators?" he demanded. "That you invited creatures capable of killing you into your homes, around your children, into your very beds?" "Yes," Amara replied simply. "That is exactly what we did." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. "But why?" asked Delegate Vorin of the Valanthi, her feathers still ruffled from the incident in the mathematics classroom. "Why would any sane species do such a thing?" Kai stepped forward to stand beside Amara. "Because Earth is a dangerous world," he explained. "Everything there is trying to kill you. The weather, the predators, the insects, even some of the plants, and we learned very early that we could not survive alone." He looked back at Bear, who had stopped pacing and was watching him intently. Tens of thousands of years ago, my ancestors looked at wolves and saw something more than just another threat. Kai continued. They saw creatures that were loyal to their pack, that worked together to hunt, that protected their young with fierce devotion, and they thought maybe we do not have to be enemies, maybe we could be family instead. You domesticated wolves? Prelax asked, leaning forward with sudden interest. We did more than domesticate them, Kai said. We changed each other. They became our partners, our protectors, our friends, and in return we gave them food, shelter, and love, and over thousands of years they became dogs, creatures born to bond with humans, to understand our emotions, to share our lives. He gestured to Bear. He is not a monster. He is my family. And he would die to protect me without a second thought, not because he is trained to, but because he loves me. Representative Myrix, still visibly shaken from her encounter with Noodle, raised a trembling pseudopod. But what about the serpent? She asked, her telepathic voice wavering. Surely you cannot claim to have bonded with such a cold and alien creature? Marcus smiled gently and walked toward Noodle's containment unit. May I? He asked the tribunal. Prelax hesitated, then nodded. The force field dropped, and Marcus reached into the enclosure. The entire chamber held its breath as the python stirred, raised her head, and then slowly flowed up his arm to drape across his shoulders. Noodle is not cold, Marcus said softly. She is not alien. She is just different. Snakes do not show affection the way dogs or cats do. But that does not mean they cannot feel trust. They cannot feel safe. He stroked the snake's smooth scales. When I first got her, she was scared of everything. She would ball up and hide whenever anyone came near. But I was patient with her. I handled her gently. I made sure she always felt secure. And eventually she learned that I would never hurt her. He looked at the tribunal with calm certainty. This is trust, he said. She knows I will protect her. And in her own way, she trusts me completely. She chooses to be with me because she feels safe, not because I force her to. Silence filled the chamber. Then Amara spoke again, her voice passionate now. Every species in this room evolved on worlds that nurtured them, worlds where the environment was kind enough to let intelligent life flourish in peace, but Earth was not kind. Earth was brutal and harsh and deadly, and we survived anyway. She looked around at the assembled representatives. We survived because we learned to find allies in unexpected places. We looked at the predators that hunted us and we said, you do not have to be our enemy. We looked at the dangerous world around us and we found ways to make it our home. That is what makes us human. Empress meowed softly from her containment unit, and Amara smiled. Can I show you something? She asked. Prelax nodded again, and the force field around Empress dropped. The cat stretched luxuriously, then padded over to Amara and began to rub against her legs, purring loudly enough for the whole chamber to hear. Do you hear that sound? Amara asked. That is called purring. Cats do it when they are happy, when they feel safe and loved. She is not hunting. She is not stalking. She is just telling me that she is glad to be with me. She picked up Empress and held her close, and the cat's eyes slowly closed in contentment. These are not monsters, Amara said firmly. They are our hearts walking outside our bodies. They are proof that love can exist between any two creatures willing to try. And if you send them away, you send away a part of us. The tribunal sat in stunned silence. Prelax looked at the three humans standing before him. Their supposedly deadly pets now cuddled against them like the beloved family members they clearly were. This tribunal will recess for deliberation, he announced, his voice strangely soft. The council will reconvene tomorrow to deliver our decision. As the humans were escorted from the chamber, Bear walking calmly at Kai's side, many in the audience noticed something remarkable. High Adjudicator Prelax, The ancient crystalline being who had seen empires rise and fall was looking at the departing humans with what could only be described as wonder. Perhaps, he thought to himself, the galaxy still had things to teach him after all. The vote to expel the humans was scheduled for the following morning, and most of the station expected the decision to be quick and final, but fate had other plans. At 3 in the morning, station time, a containment failure in the lower decks released something that had been locked away for decades. Sketh 7th parasites, mindless organisms no larger than a human fingernail, but with mandibles that could strip flesh from bone in minutes. They had been kept in the xenobiology research section for study, sealed behind multiple layers of security. But an electrical fault had failed at the worst possible moment. The swarm erupted into the ventilation system, following the warm currents of recycled air toward the dormitory levels where hundreds of sleeping students lay unaware of the danger. Alarms began to wail across the station as emergency protocols activated. "Containment breach in Sector 7. The automated voice announced. "All personnel evacuate to designated safe zones immediately. Repeat, containment breach." In the Valanthi dormitory wing, 20 students woke to the sound of screaming alarms and the sight of their door beginning to glow. The parasites had found them. The creatures were attracted to heat and movement, and they could sense the warm bodies beyond the door. Thousands of tiny mandibles began chewing through the metal, creating a growing hole that glowed with the friction of their work. The Valanthi huddled together in terror, their delicate feathers trembling as they watched the door slowly give way. They had nowhere to run and no way to fight. In a few minutes, the swarm would break through, and there was nothing anyone could do. Then a human voice rang out from the corridor beyond. "Get behind me!" Kai shouted, and something large and fast came bounding through the emergency lighting. Bear had been trained for many things back on Earth, but nothing had prepared him for alien parasites trying to eat the creatures he had come to recognize as part of his extended pack. It did not matter. The German shepherd saw the threat, felt his human's determination, and did what dogs had been doing for 10,000 years. He protected his family. Bear's barking filled the corridor with sound that disrupted the parasite's hive coordination. The creatures communicated through subtle vibrations, and the powerful sonic waves from his lungs threw their signals into chaos. When the first wave of parasites swarmed toward him, he snapped them out of the air with jaws that had evolved to take down prey much larger than himself. They bit him, cutting into his muzzle and legs, but he did not stop. He stood between the swarm and the terrified students, fighting with everything he had, buying time with his own blood. Amara arrived moments later, Empress riding on her shoulder. The cat's eyes caught the dim emergency lighting and reflected it back in an eerie glow as she scanned the shadows with vision that could detect the infrared heat signatures of every living thing nearby. "There are more in the walls," Amara called out, reading her pet's body language with practiced ease. "They are trying to flank us." Empress launched herself off Amara's shoulder with a hunter's precision, landing on a ventilation grate just as parasites began pouring through. What followed was a display of evolutionary perfection. The cat moved like liquid lightning, each strike precise, each movement efficient. Every parasite that emerged met claws that had been honed over millions of years of predatory refinement. She was not fighting out of anger or hunger, but out of the same instinct that drove her to protect the warm human who fed her and stroked her and gave her a sunny spot to nap in. The parasites had never encountered anything like her, and they died by the dozens beneath her paws. Meanwhile, Marcus had found his own way to help. The parasites tracked their prey through heat signatures, always moving toward the warmest targets they could find. Marcus walked calmly through corridors that should have meant certain death. Noodle wrapped around his torso like living armor reptiles were cold-blooded, and the python's body absorbed the heat from Marcus's skin. masking his signature while creating an irresistible target that drew the swarm's attention. "This way," he called to fleeing students. "Follow me and stay close." He led group after group to safety, the parasites following him instead of the people he was protecting, and each time he reached a bulkhead, he sealed it behind the evacuees before moving on to find more. Noodle's scales were covered in tiny scratches from parasites that tried to burrow through her, but she did not release her grip on her human. She could have fled, could have found a dark corner to hide in, but instead she held on tighter, trusting the human who had always kept her safe to know what he was doing. Back at the Valanthe dormitory, station security finally arrived to find a scene that would become legendary. Bear stood in the center of the corridor, bleeding from dozens of wounds, surrounded by the bodies of hundreds of dead parasites. Behind him, 20 Valanthe students were completely unharmed, protected by a creature they had once fled from in terror. The German shepherd's legs were shaking with exhaustion, but his eyes were still alert, still watching for any threat that might try to reach the people behind him. "Good boy," Kai whispered, tears streaming down his face as he dropped to his knees beside his dog. "You are such a good boy." Bear's tail wagged weakly, and he licked his human's face as if to say that everything was okay now. By the time the station systems were fully restored and the remaining parasites were neutralized, the full scope of what had happened became clear. The 3 humans and their pets had saved 47 lives. They had gone into danger without hesitation, had fought against a threat that should have been overwhelming, and had refused to leave anyone behind. Bear was rushed to the medical bay where 12 xenobiologists who had never treated an Earth mammal worked through the night to save him. They did not know canine anatomy, did not understand his physiology, but they learned quickly because none of them could bear the thought of letting such a brave creature die. Administrator Velith, who had once trembled at the sight of the dog, personally stood vigil outside the surgical suite. "He protected my students," she said to anyone who asked why she was there. "He bled for them without hesitation. And that makes him one of us now." When Bear finally woke from surgery, bandaged and weak but alive, the first thing he saw was Kai's face smiling down at him. The second thing he saw was a room full of aliens, all of them watching him with expressions that could only be described as awe. The vote to expel the humans was canceled before morning. Something had changed on the Galactic Unity Academy. Something fundamental and irreversible. The Deathworlders and their monsters had shown the galaxy what loyalty really meant. 3 years passed on the Galactic Unity Academy, and in that time, everything changed. The humans had not only stayed, but had become some of the most beloved students in the school's history, and their pets had transformed from feared monsters into campus celebrities. Bear, fully recovered from his wounds, had earned the unofficial title of Station Guardian. The scar tissue on his muzzle and legs had become badges of honor that even the most timid species regarded with respect rather than fear. He spent his days wandering the corridors with Kai, and students who had once fled at the sight of him now stopped to pet his fur and offer him treats. The Valanthe students were his biggest admirers, which surprised no one who knew what he had done for them. They had created a special award called the Bear Medal of Courage, given each year to the student who showed the greatest bravery in helping others. The dog himself had received the first one, presented in a ceremony where 20 feathered students sang a traditional song of gratitude while he wagged his tail in confusion. Empress had become an unexpected wellness resource. The same unblinking stare that had once terrified the Gruth students had turned out to have remarkable therapeutic properties. Something about her calm, patient presence and the deep vibration of her purr helped anxious students find peace in ways that traditional counseling could not. The Academy had established official therapeutic predator sessions, where students could sit in a quiet room with Empress and simply breathe while she watched over them. The waiting list was always full, and Amara had to schedule appointments weeks in advance. Even the Gruth, who had once filed 17 complaints about her hostile presence, had become regular visitors. She does not judge, one of them explained to a curious journalist. She just watches, and somehow that makes everything feel like it will be okay. And Noodle, the serpent that had nearly caused an interstellar incident, had become a meditation icon. The Pulari, the same species that had declared her an assassin, had discovered that watching her slow, deliberate movements produced a deeply calming effect on their gelatinous minds. Counselor Myrix, fully recovered from her initial trauma, had become Noodle's biggest advocate. "I was wrong about her," Myrix admitted in an interview that was broadcast across 3 star systems. "I saw a predator and assumed the worst, but she is not a killer. She is simply different. And different is not the same as dangerous." Marcus had started offering weekly sessions where interested students could observe Noodle eating, shedding, or simply existing. The sight of the snake slowly digesting a meal had become, somehow, one of the most popular relaxation activities on the station. The Galactic Council had convened a special summit on Deathworld bonding practices, bringing together scientists, diplomats, philosophers, and pet owners from across human space. For the first time in galactic history, other species were genuinely curious about how humans had achieved the impossible. "You looked at creatures that could kill you and chose to love them instead," High Adjudicator Prelax said during his opening remarks. "This is perhaps the most remarkable thing any species has ever done." The summit lasted for 6 weeks and produced thousands of pages of research. By the end, 3 other species had begun tentative domestication programs with native animals from their own worlds. It would take generations to know if any of them would succeed, but the seed had been planted. On graduation day, the entire academy gathered to watch the human students receive their degrees. Kai stood at the podium with Bear sitting proudly beside him, and he looked out at the crowd of alien faces that had become as familiar to him as his own family back on Earth. "When we first arrived here, we scared you," he said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. "Our world scared you, our history scared you, and most of all, our pets scared you." A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the audience. "But you gave us a chance to show you who we really are, and for that, we will always be grateful." He looked down at Bear, who gazed back at him with eyes full of unconditional love. "Where I come from, the world tried to kill us every single day. Everything was a threat: the weather, the terrain, the predators that hunted in the darkness. We should have been afraid of everything. We should have hidden away and trusted nothing." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But instead, my ancestors looked at the wolves circling their campfires and saw something more than danger. They saw loyalty, they saw courage, they saw the potential for something beautiful, and they reached out their hands and said, 'You do not have to be alone. We can face this world together.'" Bear's tail wagged slowly as Kai continued, "That is the most human thing about us. We look at the things that could destroy us, and we ask them if they want to be family. Instead, we take the fear and we transform it into love, and somehow, against all odds, it works." He smiled at the crowd. "You were afraid of our pets because you did not understand them, but now you do, and I hope you have learned the same lesson that humanity learned so long ago." He knelt down and wrapped his arms around Bear's neck. "The universe is full of things that seem scary and dangerous, but sometimes the monsters are not monsters at all. Sometimes they are just friends you have not made yet." The applause that followed shook the walls of the chamber administrator Velith, who was openly crying despite having no tear ducts. Unveiled the newest addition to the Academy, the Terran Companion Studies Center, a whole wing dedicated to researching the bonds between Deathworlders and their animals, equipped with the finest facilities and staffed by researchers from dozens of species. Above the entrance, carved in letters that would last for centuries, was a quote from the tribunal 3 years before: "These are not monsters. They are our hearts walking outside our bodies." As Kai, Amara, and Marcus left the academy for the last time, their pets at their sides, They passed through corridors filled with students who stopped to wave goodbye. A Valanthe child ran up to Bear and hugged him around the neck, and the dog stood perfectly still, letting her feathers tickle his nose. A Gruth student knelt down to scratch Empress behind the ears. And the cat purred loudly enough for everyone to hear. A young Pulari extended a gentle pseudopod toward Noodle, and the snake allowed the touch without flinching. The galaxy had been changed by 3 humans and their pets, not through conquest or technology or political power, but through the simple act of showing what love between different creatures could look like. As their ship pulled away from the station, Kai looked back one last time at the place that had become his second home. Somewhere down there, students were learning that fear did not have to be the end of a relationship. Somewhere down there, species were beginning to understand that trust could be built between any 2 beings willing to try, and somewhere down there, the next generation was growing up in a galaxy that knew what humans had always known. The monsters were never really monsters. They were just waiting for someone brave enough to offer them a home. The stars stretched out before them, infinite and full of possibility. And Bear, resting his head on Kai's lap, wagged his tail in his sleep, dreaming of all the friends he had made in a place where nobody had expected him to find any. The humans had brought their pets to school, and the galaxy would never be the same.